Good morning and welcome. 4 minutes past 8 at AM 1380. The Answer on the Phil Cowan program. I'm very pleased to welcome the president of the National Right to Work Foundation, who just played an important role in a case that we'll talk about in a moment. Mark Mix joins us to tell us about one lab, an assistant named Amber Walker at University of California, Irvine, who just settled with them to her favor thanks to the foundation. And Mark, thanks for joining us. I have a question about this that I think everybody who sees this story has the same reaction. I thought the Janice case settled this. Why is this even an issue?
Well, Phil, it's good to be on with you. Thanks for the opportunity. That's a great question. And it's not really surprising to us, unfortunately. But to your point, people that read a story like this where we win a victory on behalf of an employee in exercising their, let me get this straight, Phil, it's important, constitutional First Amendment rights granted by the Janice decision back in June of 2018, what we find in many states, and California is probably, unfortunately, the leader of this, and that is that the California legislature, the California legislature is basically given all of the power to union officials to set up a dues deduction schedule for union dues. And so this case is really represented. This is kind of like a Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. What we find is the best of times is this individual employee was able to exercise her rights and get her money back and stop the deduction. But the worst of times is the unions get to set up the protocols and the requirements for doing this. And Phil, in this case, she did everything right. She got in this so-called escape window period that's been created by the union that says if you miss it, Phil, let me ask you a quick question. What is a blue moon, Phil?
Isn't that a second full moon in the same month?
Exactly, and they're fairly rare too. So what the unions have done out in California is they created these windows to say, look, you gotta slice it just right. You gotta thread the needle during the two blue moons in order to get your First Amendment rights, and exercise those rights. So basically, in California, these employees only have First Amendment rights during a very narrow window period that's created by the union. Well, she knew about it. She filed her statement saying, I want out. I don't want you taking more money.
In a timely manner.
Between the two blue moons, and she got it done right. The union says, no, you didn't get it right because you didn't send in a photo ID as well, and by the time she sent the photo ID in, Phil, guess what?
The window had closed.
That's right. And so now she's stuck for another year in the full payment of those dues that the union's going to take out of her paycheck automatically. So, anyway, it's a fun story in the sense that she won, and what we believe is the union looked at it and said, you know what, if the Right to Work Foundation, who has a history of taking these things all the way from local courts to the U.S. Supreme Court, wants to litigate this, we better back out and give her everything back and say that they were going to strike down the so-called photo ID clause in order to exercise your First Amendment rights.
Well, you bring up an interesting point with this opt-out window that they're doing here in California, because we knew about this as soon as Janice was decided in 2018. We're a haven for government employees here in Sacramento, and we're hearing stories already about, you can opt out, but they give you it's like a 2-week period in which you can opt out, and if you don't get opted out, then you're in until the next opt-out period. Are other states doing the same thing?
Absolutely. And, again, Phil, Sacramento and California seem to be leading indicators on this stuff. New Jersey did it in May of 2018. They actually passed a statute that created a 10-day window period, escape period, statutorily. And, California, I don't know if they actually have a statutorily created window period, but what they did was even worse. They basically said, any union official, you are the ones that are going to enforce this, and the unions have said, we'll indemnify you, State of California, Local Bargaining Unit California, UC Irvine, wherever these things exist. We'll indemnify you. Don't worry. You won't have to worry about a thing. We'll take care of everything. And that's when the union creates their own kind of imposed window period saying, you got to get out between the two blue moons and you got to send a photo ID. And if you miss any of that, you're in for another year. So it's the union officials and the power that the legislature in Sacramento has granted to these people that basically creates this ambiguity when it comes to exercising your First Amendment rights. So, Phil, your First Amendment rights only are in effect for 10 days out of a year in New Jersey. You don't get them for 355 other days.
I find it so interesting that the organized labor continues to just thumb their nose at court decisions. Do they offer any rationale for organizing the opting out of union dues the way they have, or is it just simply to make it as hard as they possibly can make it?
Well, I would like to give them the benefit of the doubt, Phil, but I've been doing this for 35 years, and it's after about the first year, you run out of benefit of the doubt. It's become, it's a money thing. They are very powerful. In Sacramento, like no other place, frankly, maybe New York and Illinois, the government unions there are the voice. I mean, you have, people representing the SEIU and AFSCME out in California standing up in hearings in Sacramento saying, hey, you know who you're talking to here? We're your boss, man. We get to elect you, so we're your boss. And they make these demands, and it's really unfortunate for workers that just want to basically do their work, exercise their rights. And now with Janus, their First Amendment rights. Let's get that straight. This is a constitutional question, Phil, and yet the government allows union officials to violate constitutional rights for 350 days in New Jersey and allows unions in Sacramento and across California to do it at their whim.
So now, what are the broader implications of this settlement? Are people going to have an opportunity now to opt out outside the window? Is it that far-reaching?
Well, I don't think so, but, we're litigating that right now in a case that's coming out of Alaska. It's on its way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It's being briefed there. The Alaska Attorney General is involved. So the Ninth Circuit's got some action as it relates to these window periods, escape periods. But what we're trying to do here, and thank you, Phil, for helping us with this, is let state employees in Sacramento and across California know what their rights are and be able to challenge the window period, the escape period. Obviously, right now, the unions realize that they didn't want to litigate it, so they'll probably let you out. If you just say, look, I want to get out, and they reject it, and say, okay, I'm going to file a suit, call the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation, we'll send a letter on your behalf, and it looks like they're more interested in letting a few people out than having us litigate and protecting all the workers in California, and let alone across the United States.
It's interesting. Have you found that there are a lot of public employees, in particular, because that's where organized labor is mostly concentrated these days, who are unaware of their rights under the Janus decision?
Yeah, unfortunately, that's the truth.
Wow.
Phil. There's lots of folks out there making the case for this, and there's information getting out there. But education it takes a lot of work to educate these employees, and the unions certainly aren't telling them. And believe me, the state of California is not telling them, and the localities and the UC, the University of California system's not telling them. The California State University system's not telling them. The only way they can understand it is by hearing us talk on the radio about it, winning lawsuits like this, winning settlements like this. I mean, we just got to continue to get the word out and help people exercise their rights.
Well, I appreciate the work that you do. I am a right-to-work advocate. And by the way, since I have you here, before we run out of time, there's been a lot of talk in all these supply chain issues about the Southern California ports in L.A. and in Long Beach, and then the supply chain issues, and then just the lack of functionality in those facilities right now. There's been a lot of talk about organized labor playing a significant role in that. Is that the case? What are they doing?
Absolutely, Phil. And one of the major causes of the problems there is AB 5. And you know a lot about AB 5.
Oh,
We've
yeah.
talked about that before. And this is actually putting truck drivers that are doing the port work, basically saying if you're not an employee, meaning we can't unionize you, you can't service the ports anymore. By eliminating independent contractors, they took all of the owner-operators that are servicing the ports and saying you can no longer be here unless you are hired by a motor carrier that we basically approve of, and you become an employee so we can unionize you.
So now, has that just been a change? Has that been a change since AB 5?
Well, no, yeah, from AB 5. That the emission standards, all of the employee independent contractor standards that come out of AB 5 are part of this problem. And so in 2018, if you were an owner-operator working the ports, and all of a sudden you see AB 5 pass and it says, okay, you've got to be an employee in order to work at the ports anymore. You got to be hired by a motor carrier that's authorized there. You can't be an owner-operator. You're basically have left it. I'm not going to work here anymore. And that's one of the big problems at the ports is the lack of trucks, the lack of chassis, the lack of the ability to get containers into the off the port into a location, getting them back into the port to be shipped back out. I mean, there is so much going on here with the ILA. Well, actually out there, it's the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union. On the East Coast, it's the ILA. On the West Coast, it's the ILWU. And interestingly enough, Phil, you'll be talking about this for the next year because they've got a contract coming up. And usually we know from history when the contract comes up and they're negotiating, things tend to slow down, and they tend to prove that they need to have a bigger voice by slowing things down on the port. It's all coming together very, very nicely to choke off the supply chain. In California, 40% of all the imports in the United States come through Long Beach and Los Angeles. That's an amazing amount of power by union officials.
I'm a little confused, though, about the AB 5 involvement here. AB 5 was purportedly to prevent people from, whether you were an Uber driver or DoorDash or, FedEx, although that case was tried a long time ago, regarding them being independent contractors. They wanted the independent contractor status to go away, and you had to become an employee. I don't understand how that affects an independent owner-operator of that rig. Isn't he in business for himself?
Yeah, he is. Much like the argument would go for an Uber driver. They're using a computer platform, an AI platform, to determine how they work, but they turn on the machine when they want. They turn it off when they want.
They don't have to work when they don't want to work.
That's right. And that's what truck drivers do, too. These independent contractors, these owner-operators, were servicing the ports, and now they can't do it unless they're, quote, an employee. So the idea of independent contractor, whether it be owner-operator or whatever it is, AB 5 was designed to allow unions to organize more workers because they can't organize independent contractors. They can't organize owner-operators, but they can organize employees. So the nexus there is just complete. When you look at the picture of what happened and how AB 5 affects it, that's one of the elements that came into the port system and the port structure for a long time. And I know there's a case pending at the U.S. Supreme Court right now, the California Trucking Association, the Banta, I think it is pending in the court. We expected it to be conferenced about a week ago, but they asked the state to brief it, and there's more briefing going on, so it's not going to be heard probably for another month. Well, it won't be heard for a while. It won't be conferenced for another month or so. So that, if you're an independent owner-operator out there, you're wondering, what are you going to do if the Supreme Court doesn't take the case? And now you can't work at all. You go someplace else and try to find work. And so that's why, literally 70,000 owner-operators, truck drivers are short out there in California because they're going other places to find work because they can't rely on the ports anymore.
Regarding AB 5, it's been a nightmare here, obviously. I don't think they really thought it through when they wrote this thing. This was all just a big kiss on the lips for organized labor. What are other states, how are other states reacting to this? Are they looking at it saying, hey, we're not going there, that's nothing but trouble? Or are they embracing it and thinking, hey, break me off some of that?
No, as far as I know, no other state has got a statute anything like AB 5. But, Phil, guess what? The United States Congress has passed a bill all the way through the House of Representatives without any committee hearings or any testimony. It's pending out in the U.S. Senate that basically takes the original AB 5, not the AB 5 that was amended in the 2020 referendum, which I guess was struck down by the California Supreme Court. Not to get into that melee, but the original language of AB 5 is now in a federal statute or federal bill that Joe Biden wants to get on his desk and wants to sign that will impose AB 5 across the nation. So no state has to think about it. They just have to wait to see if Congress and Nancy Pelosi decide to impose it on the rest of the country. It's one of those things. Feel our misery. We know this is bad, but the only way to fix it is to impose it on everyone.
You make it bad for us all. You know what that is, Mark? It's equity.
There you go. You got it, Phil.
That's equity. Is there any chance that's going to get through the Senate, do you think?
Well, if the filibuster rules change, then there is a really big chance.
Well,
There's 47 co-sponsors on that bill, 47 co-sponsors. And that bill, not only would it do that type of thing, AB 5 stuff, but it would also repeal all 27 right-to-work laws across the country as well. So they want to force every worker in America to pay union dues to get or keep a job, and obviously we'll keep fighting. But if they change the filibuster rules, then the game is on for sure.
Well, I think they want to force everybody to pay union dues to not just get and keep a job, but in order to fund democratic political efforts.
Well, that's the way it turns out most of the time. I won't make it such a broad statement, but yeah, there's one party that benefits dramatically from this. One party.
Don't worry, I will as soon as we're done here. Mark Mix, always a pleasure. Thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure, Phil. Thank you.
All right, take care. AM 1380, The Answer.